Tim Smith of the Smith Group here at Cinna Newport presenting our podcast Room, where we're here to highlight and expose the amazing people, places, properties, and stories of Southern California to the world. Today, I'm so excited to have Jared Mathis, Managing Director, CEO of the Moulton Company. Let's start off before we jump into it. Tell us a little bit about your family, where you live, because I want everybody in here to understand the different areas of Orange County.
Great. It's great to be here, Tim. Thanks for having me. I live in Laguna Hills, and I've got a wife and three daughters, 8, 10, and 12. And we love it there. We've got a place in Nelly Gail Ranch, and we work now actually in Laguna Hills too. We've moved our offices from Irvine Spectrum just down off Cabot Road.
So we met about, I want to say it was 2011.
Yeah.
In 2000, give a little bit of history, because for the people that don't know you, talk a little bit about the Moulton Company, and then let's go back to when we met and we'll go through it a little bit.
Sure. So I'm a California guy, but I grew up in Northern California, about an hour north of Sacramento. And we moved here in 2013, but I was coming out here for meetings based on our real estate properties and everything. And our old attorney, Bill Brinklow, connected us, you and I. And we moved out here for business because I took over the family office, Moulton Company, which is, as you know, a real estate company essentially with holdings in a number of different states and actually across the globe.
And let's jump into that a little bit, because there's this just wild content with Yellowstone 1883. And when you took me to the museum, it literally blew my mind, because we watch these shows about people coming to the West, coming to Montana, and then right here in Orange County, you have two of the most epic stories between the Irvine Ranch and the Moulton Ranch. So give us a little bit of the history and how you're related in it.
So my last name Mathis, right? But I'm part of Moulton family, which is Lewis and Nelly.
This is Moulton Parkway.
Moulton Parkway.
And Nelly Gail, which is his grandmother.
Right. So the Moulton family was Lewis Moulton and Nelly Gail Moulton, both my great-grandparents. And Lewis put together what became known as Moulton Ranch, which was basically Irvine to San Juan Capistrano, with the eastern border being I-5, or what I-5 is now. And then it wound its way down Laguna Canyon and to the water where Monarch Bay is today. And so that was a 22,000-acre ranch. And so, as I mentioned, I grew up in Northern California, about an hour north of Sacramento. That was a ranch that was born from the incremental sale of Moulton Ranch. And
what type of ranch were you born on? What were you guys ranching?
Cattle, and then much like it was down here, wheat, barley, beans, corn, that sort of thing.
And were you actually growing up on a horse, ranching, feeding, branding?
Totally, all that.
Vaccinating, moving.
I had a horse and a black lab. My horse was named Wino, and my dog was named Boozer. So there you go. That's how I grew up, and in a great small town, a little place called Maxwell, and a town of about 1,000 people when I was born, and it still pretty much is. Public high school of 100 people.
Wow.
There's a lot of jets at the private terminal at Orange County Airport that fly to find things like that, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But I was lucky enough to grow up in a town like Maxwell where everybody's family for the most part,
So before we get into the Lewis Moulton story, because I love the story and I've been sharing it a lot, tell us a little bit about the family history. So Lewis he comes down here, he settles it. We'll get into that story. And then tell us a little bit about how the family history led to the Moulton Company.
So after they formed Moulton Ranch, Lewis and Nelly Gail had two daughters, my grandmother Charlotte and her sister Louise. And that's why the Moulton name went away, because Mathis came in, so the Moulton name just didn't carry on after that, because they just had the two daughters. Charlotte, my grandmother, had three kids, my dad, his brother, and sister. Her sister Louise, she had three husbands, no kids. And so from there, they really just loved the ranching lifestyle, right? And they loved the livestock and living with the land, not on the land, right? And so when it came that development was encroaching upon the contiguous acres that we had, and taxes were getting higher, and all of those things, all the things that you see on Yellowstone today.
Yeah.
The decision was made to then start to peel off parts of the ranch, and then other ranches were born. So they chose ranching over development, and that's
Which is funny because it's the same like Yellowstone concept.
Totally.
Right? It's like, no airport. We're not doing it.
right, exactly. But yet, then there's also some really fun stuff of the development that was done while we still had the ranch, like the ziggurat, right?
Right.
That thing was out there.
Talk
all by
about this
itself.
ziggurat building because I don't think anybody knows what that is.
So Aunt Louise put the deal together with Rockwell many years ago. We have all the paperwork on it and how it was actually built, and it just went for sale the other day.
I saw that.
The GSA put it up for sale. It's going for bid. I think the minimum bid is $70 million. I think it'll go much higher. But
Yeah.
in any case, it's 89 acres there, that parcel, and
this was kind of in the heart of your ranch. When
Right.
you look at those 22,000 acres, it was kind of like the epicenter.
and we have some great pictures of where it's just sitting there by itself with cattle and nothing else around it. But it was originally white, and William Pereira, famed architect, and he created the UCI campus, that space age building next to LAX,
Yeah.
the Transamerica building in San
Yeah.
Francisco, among other countless architecturally significant buildings. But he was a family friend, so he put together that building and in that deal with Louise, and it was white, and they used to call it the White Whale. And Louise was pretty tight-lipped about it. The rest of the family really didn't know exactly the terms or how it was done. We do now.
Yeah.
But they would go buy it on horseback or in a Jeep or something, and they'd call it the White Whale because it just stuck out.
And there was nothing around it.
nothing around it. It was
Yeah.
just the ziggurat. So the Taj Mahal, which is in Laguna Hills, that building, that was the first big building that was built on the old ranch. It was part of the Leisure World development area, which was the first part of the ranch to sell. That was the first big building, but then the one that really stood out was that ziggurat building.
So let's jump into the Lewis story because it's funny. We had our holiday, team Christmas party, and
Sure.
and Mulaney decided we're going to do a cowboy theme. And so when we started talking about it, I started looking and I was thinking about our tour of the museum, which we'll talk about,
Yeah,
and how rich our history is.
Sure.
And how the pioneer spirit, the cowboy spirit, is the same spirit that lives in the entrepreneurs, which seems like everybody in Orange County, that's how they made their money, and they took the risk. And let's go back. So Lewis Moulton is in Boston. You have Bunker Hill, you have Moulton Hill.
Yeah.
And he probably had like the perfect layout for a great life if he stayed in Boston, right?
100
Wealthy family.
100%. Sure.
And so Lewis decides that he's going to go out west. And tell us a little bit about that story.
So before he even got to Boston, right? He was born in Illinois to his parents, and his dad was a classmate of Abraham Lincoln. And so Abe was also in Illinois and would come over to the house and literally like bounce Lewis on his knee. And so as we were going back and looking at influences of, why Lewis would make some bold choices, we really go back to those early influences, which Abraham Lincoln was a big part of it. And wild story in that once he became president and then was assassinated is when his parents actually split.
Yeah.
His dad stayed in Illinois and he went with his mom to Boston, and their last name was Fenno. And the Fennos were pretty established in terms of they were in publishing, they were in wool business, they were in all these things. And he started working on what was Daniel Webster's old farm, just making wages, but he would have been fine. I mean, they had a real presence on Beacon Street, and they could have he could have had just a fine life. But at age 20, whatever else moved him, and there's other fun stories about ancestors of his that fought in the war. As you mentioned, Charlestown. There's Bunker Hill, Breeds Hill, and Moulton Hill because Brigadier General Moulton fought off the British at Moulton's Hill and was given the flag by George Washington. So those are the stories that he grew up with.
Yeah.
So at age 20, he just hops on a steamer ship and comes west. It comes around.
And one theme to jump in there, because
Yeah.
one thing we've had in this podcast series, a constant theme, is that pioneer or entrepreneurial spirit. And there's
Right.
some that came in here, they talked about a book, Discipline No More. I'm not getting into it, but one of the things about it is you actually move yourself out of an environment to something new. And if you look at the definition of sacrifice and look at the Latin word, it's to give up something to
Yep.
get something better. Now,
Right.
in the infancy, he couldn't imagine, I'm going to give up this life of comfort and the job and, everybody knows my family to go out west.
Right.
So it's that theme of actually physically moving into your dream and vision. And now 200 and some odd years later, we have what we have. So he jumps on a steamer ship and tell us the path.
And then he ends up going through the Isthmus of Panama and landed in Wilmington, California, on that ship, and then ended up on a stagecoach landing in Santa Ana on May 6th, 1874 at midnight. And the next day went to work for old man Irvine as a sheep herder.
So that was James Irvine number 1,
Yeah.
which passed away, and then James Irvine number 2 came in,
Right.
right? Yeah.
Rancho San Joaquin was the Irvine Ranch, which was 4 to 5 times bigger than Moulton Ranch because it went way back inward. But yeah, he went to work with him, and then eventually started putting in his own business, leasing ground, taking sheep all the way down to like Long Beach. They'd spark fires with the gas that was coming out of the dirt.
Yeah.
He had a 7-sided portable house that he'd take with him and go. And so it was work. It was real work.
So he went ranch hand, shepherd.
Right. And then started getting more entrepreneurial in that he would lease land and have tenant farmers. And what was most of Moulton Ranch, he was leasing before he bought it.
Yeah.
But that was a 20-year journey.
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't purchase the ranch until 1895, and he arrived in 1874. So there was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears along the way.
Yeah, and I bet the journals, because I mean, the thing that was amazing to me when I came down to your museum is the records you guys had.
Yeah, we've
Like
got it
they
all.
kept everything.
I think technically they'd call us hoarders now.
Yeah.
But I'd like to think that they had some sort of clairvoyance about what they knew would be important.
Do you think, what do you think prepared Lewis for this? Do you think it was just the rich history with the Revolutionary War, with being,
I think those were definitely influences. I think he was just cut a little different than most.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that he had courage in ways that, we all hope to have. And beyond that, also, I think, which is really important, and I think very influential on me and the rest of the family, is that we have letters, proclamations, countless ones from neighbors saying what a good guy he was.
Yeah.
How fair he was, how he bent over backwards for his friends and neighbors. And to us, that's really
that's another
true to our spirit.
But that's another little segment. First of all, having the vision, making the move, and then what do they say? Ability gets you to the top, but character will keep you there. If you don't have character and if you're not doing the right things, you can't sustain that type of growth that he had.
Right, totally. Because when he put it all on the line, as you go from his arrival to 1874 to when he actually purchased the ranch in 1895,
Before you
yeah,
go there, give
yeah.
us like what in the depictions, because I have this vision of Yellowstone, nobody being there, all this.
Yeah.
What was the coast of Southern California at the time?
Yeah. So, excellent question. I brought my dad down here. We lost dad in 19. But I brought him down here after we had moved here. I brought him here in about 16. And he hadn't been back since 1968. Now, if you can imagine, that 22,000 acres was his backyard.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. I mean, and it was all fenced and there was nobody there. And what also wasn't there was all the trees and all the earth that had been moved. When I brought him back, he couldn't recognize it at all.
Yeah.
Because all these residential trees, all the houses, all this stuff, it had changed it so much. But I took him top of the world above Laguna Beach, which was part of the old ranch.
Yeah.
As it cut behind Laguna Beach.
Right.
And when he saw it from there and he could look down towards Soka University and Wood Canyon and all that,
Yeah.
I mean, I could literally see the goosebumps like on his arm and the hair raise up, and it all came back to him. And he started telling stories about, rattlesnakes that were so big you could wrap them around your front bumper of your Jeep, that sort of thing. And it all really kind of started coming back to him. He'd start to tell some stories. He wasn't really verbose, right? I mean, kind of that generation, but certainly in his characteristic, he didn't talk much about that sort of thing. But seeing it really kind of unlocked some of those great stories. So I was really happy we got to do that. So it was absolutely just like your backyard, but it was just all these rolling hills with grain and everything. It kind of
makes me think of what if you go down to Baja, California, where you just see coastline and just unadulterated land everywhere. You start thinking, but now it's become one of the top places in the world to live, especially with COVID. Because like if you look at where do I want a second home, you have unbelievable climate, lifestyle, and then the safety issue. Right. Like we don't have some of the issues from crime or homelessness. Right. So let's jump into Lewis's story. So he's here for 20 years. How does he go from sheep herder to landowner?
Right. So Juan had the Spanish land grant, which by the way we have in the Moulton Museum. We have the original from Ulysses S. Grant. But anyway, Juan gets that from the U.S. Congress, and so he had about a 16,000 acre swath of land, of which was all of Moulton Ranch, plus Moulton Ranch was another 5,000 contiguous further to the east. So Rancho Niguel was being leased by Lewis, and it was owned by a guy by the name of Cyrus Rawson, who was a Laguna Beach guy, great guy by all accounts, but was a bit of a gambler in that he got himself over his skis. He leveraged himself too much. And so he wanted to sell the ranch. And Lewis wanted to buy it because he saw what he could do and he knew he could put the extra.
Did he have the money?
He did not have the money to do it.
Entrepreneur lesson number 2, right?
So he wrote back to Boston to his cousin Lawrence Fenno, who's a character, and we have all these letters back and forth.
Yeah.
I mean, we have exactly what they said to one another. And basically...
and Lawrence had to be saying, wait a second, you want to buy some ranch land, some wasteland, right?
Because there was no water, there was no entitlement, there was no nothing. It was just dry land in what is basically a desert, right? And so how are you going to do that? He was not in favor of it. He said basically it was the beginning of many failures if he goes down this path to buy it. They went back and forth, and ultimately Lewis just went for it and made the deal. Without the permission or without the consent of his lender, his cousin, Lawrence
which is
Fenno.
a great story because how often do we find in the kind of entrepreneurial spirit or pioneer spirit, it's like you can't always try to figure out how you're going to do it. You figure out this is what I want. I'm going to do it. And somehow
we're going to make it work.
We're going to make it work.
And luckily, at the end of the day, Lawrence backed his play. He said, "Listen, blood's thicker than water. If you truly made this deal, then I'm going to back it." And you've got I think it was $125,000 at the time.
So $125,000 for the whole ranch?
For all 22,000 acres, yeah. Pretty good deal. And so...
I would love to know if we could calculate what that land would be worth today.
Oh, we've run the numbers, but it's
8 figures for sure.
It's something nutty, but anyway, so he backed the play, and
reluctantly he backs it. So then they go, and then what happens?
Then drought.
It was the biggest drought in like 125 years, right?
Yeah, literally the only one close to it is the one that we're in now, right? So everything, the bottom falls out of everything, and the price of wool drops by half.
Yeah. And
at the time on the ranch, that was their primary deal, was raising sheep, and so you can imagine, and we've all been there in deals where you're all fired up and you get and then the bottom falls out for whatever reason, but this was pretty grand scale, and so the way they got through it was to actually, rather than having to sell everything, they were able to store wool in Boston until. But
this is when they took the herd up to Bishop.
This was
they lost like 20% of them,
right? So if you can imagine,
and Bishop's up near Mammoth, so you're taking your herd up there,
right? We don't like to drive there because it's too long to go skiing, right? 5-6 hour drive. Yeah. Can you imagine driving literally on horseback 12,000 sheep from the Orange County Moulton Ranch area, all the way to Bishop.
What was the reason to go up there? Why did they?
That's the only place that there was feed.
Yeah.
And at the time, there wasn't enough, or there wasn't very much private owned land that got in the way.
Yeah.
Eventually, that's why they had to stop doing that, because they couldn't get through the private property on the way to Bishop.
Yeah. To get
but yeah, I mean, you're literally going through the desert. I mean, the Mojave Desert. So we marvel at it. I mean, it's unbelievable to drive 12,000 sheep all the way to Bishop just so they can get feed, if they don't die along the way.
Right.
But those are the stakes.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. Also, to get through it, as we often have to do in business, he took on a partner.
Right. Which is the partner that helped him move the herd up to.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. At first, he just had him as somebody who was helping move those sheep, but then he came in as a business partner, and his name was Jean-Pierre Daguerre. And there's a type of old photography called daguerreotype.
Yeah.
And that was his family. So he had a little bit of backing himself. But his journey to California, where Lewis's took about 6 weeks to go from Boston to Orange County, for Jean-Pierre to get over from France, it was about a 6-month journey. And he had a wife and 2 daughters and a son as well. And they ended up living right next to each other. And their headquarters was where the Laguna Hills Mall is now today. That's where the main ranch headquarters were, where the Daguerres and Moulton were.
And so, like, going back to that, so they lost 20% of their sheep, the price of wolf, how did they get through that?
Yeah, they stored the wool in Boston. Lawrence Fenno, again, kind of the savior.
And in the letters, is he like, really? Didn't I tell you not to do this?
You're right. Only the beginning of the failures, right?
Yeah.
But he said, okay, I'm going to, so he took the wool in, sold it at good prices when the market came back. And a lot of other sheep herders had gone out of business,
yeah,
because they didn't have the luxury of storing the wool.
Right.
Right. So they had that ability to weather the storm.
Yeah.
And so when they came out of it, now he had a business partner with some backing, and he had some cash from the sale of the wool. They'd weathered the big fight, and they were ready to go.
So jump into this, because as you're talking, I'm actually just keep on thinking about the films that you had made down at the Moulton Museum.
Right.
And those were made almost similar to like an MTV like cartoon about Lewis, because I'm just watching these films in my head and it's just like an epic story. So talk a little bit about the museum now.
So we never thought we'd end up putting a museum together, but as I said, we were kind of hoarders. And all the artifacts that came off of the old Moulton Ranch that were of significance, the family held on to. And as my great aunt Louise was nearing the end of her life, she's the one that had most of it. Yeah. Because she was the last to leave. She owned basically what Aliso Viejo was. Yeah. As they kind of divided up the property of the ranch. And so she left in the mid 70s. And so she ended up buying what was supposed to be a golf clubhouse for a golf club that never was built, north of Santa Barbara in a place called Lompoc. And she, so it had this big great room, and she ended up with these buggies and all sorts of different things. And so she kind of created her own personal little museum. But nobody ever saw it because she didn't really like people all that much. Yeah. She was a little bit cranky sometimes. Yeah. But she was the best cowboy cowgirl you've ever seen.
Well, I think I heard you say one time she was the one that would drive up in a convertible Mercedes and jump on a horse, and she was just a straight badass.
Yeah. She'd usually like have a bale of hay in the back of the Mercedes too. Yeah. She was tough, and she was a Renaissance woman for sure. But anyway, yeah. So she had all this stuff, and as she got to the end of her life, she died in 2014. So that's really wild when you think about Nelly Gail, that her youngest daughter, lived all the way till 14. I mean, after I had moved here. So in any case, the continuum's kind of fun to look at. But once we saw the depth, the breadth of what we had, we knew we had to do something. And the first thing we needed to do was to get it all back to Orange County. And that's what we did. We got the family together, we formed the foundation that led to the museum, and we brought it all back. And that felt right, because I don't think her heart ever left Orange County. The stacks of magazines like that in her great room, they were all Balboa Bay Club magazines. Yeah. I don't think if they had a choice, they would have never left.
Yeah.
You know?
So she was an Orange County girl at heart.
Oh yeah. I mean, listen, that was her whole life, and she loved it, and she knew every inch of it because she rode horse on every square foot of that 22,000 acres. She knew it better than anybody. And so, one thing that I think she learned from that
Which
experience,
is interesting, though, that Lewis had 2 daughters.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what are you going to do? You're going to make them work. And so,
Right.
and then you start thinking of the 1883 story about the girl that crosses, goes from the east to the west and ends up there. I start imagining how great the story and the images of the 2 daughters would be. Louise with the hay bale in the back of a Mercedes jumping on a horse.
And we haven't even touched on Nelly Gail, which is really probably the best story of all.
So let's touch on it.
Okay, so anyway, from Louise's collection and from the rest of the family's collection, we started the museum, and it was the right thing to do, although it was never the intent. But we're
give
really
everybody
happy.
the address right now, just so they know.
So we're on Cabot Road in Laguna Hills, and you just go to moultonmuseum.org and you can get all the coordinates. Yeah. And we're
but you
we're
can't
thrilled.
find those films on the website. You have to go to the museum to see them.
Well, we do have a YouTube channel that most of the things are on, but there's a special thing to come to the museum,
awesome.
for sure. And so Nelly Gail married Lewis in 1908.
Yeah.
Now she was a school teacher and an administrator up in the Seattle area, but her dad ran the El Toro General Store. And at that time, that's where the train came through. That's where the mail came. That's where everything was. That's where everybody went. And anyway, she worked there in the summertime. That's where she met Lewis. But if you back up to her very beginning, she was born in Kansas. And last night I was at Laguna Playhouse, and there was a Christmas panto called The Winter of Oz, and it was a takeoff of Wizard of Oz, which was kind of poignant because at 6 months of age, Nelly Gail was in Kansas, in Irvine, Kansas, where 2 big tornadoes came through and literally picked her up in her house, threw her across the house, destroyed the town. And legend has it is that those tornadoes that came through were the inspiration for those opening scenes in Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
So anyway, just kind of funny. But yeah, so she was, hit in the face early and persevered, and she was tough lady. She ended up, like you mentioned, 1883. She traveled west in a covered wagon to the Pacific Northwest, just like that show.
Yeah.
About the same age as that main character when she did it.
Yeah.
And such a dangerous road to travel to get there, but they did. And it was when she met Lewis that then they started to court, and by 1908 they got married. And she was a fair amount younger than Lewis too. I mean, she was 20 some odd years younger than he was. And he lived till 1938. She lived till 1972.
Right. So she outlived him.
Oh.
And she was like, she was like the cornerstone of this whole ranch and this whole story.
Yeah. I mean, you look back at what she did and what she wrote and what she painted. She was an artist. She was a businesswoman. She was in charge of the whole empire. After Lewis died in 38, all the way through till 72, she died.
I'm just visualizing the picture where it was a full male dinner.
Yeah.
Everybody, history of Orange County, and then Nelly Gail was there.
It's one of my favorite things in the museum. In 1925, they had a party on the ranch, and it was celebrating Lewis's 50th year in Orange County. And we know everybody that was there because the LA Times did an article on it, and everybody's name was listed. And it's all the folks that really built Orange County.
Yeah.
So they were surrounded by all these people that were just amazing in their own right. And it's all guys, right, in the picture, except there's one gal in the middle, and it was Nelly Gail. And I just imagine her saying, "Forget you, I'm getting in this picture." I mean, I put together this damn party. I'm going to get in the picture. I'd imagine that there was a lot of wives that were there at the party too, but they were off on the side and not in the picture. But Nelly Gail wasn't going to have any of that.
Yeah.
So she was like I said, she ran the empire. She made a lot of really critical decisions, things like Monarch Bay. She created the lease for that.
We're going to come back to that because I want to end with that because Monarch Bay is such a
she
special
also was
place.
such a big believer in the arts and education, right? And so she spent a lot of time painting. She was a really good artist in her own right, was a contemporary with a lot of the folks that are much more famous for their work in the plein air world. Anna Hills, William Went, Edgar Payne. These were all people that she hung with that are legends, masters that she picked up a lot. But she painted her whole life, and we have all of her works that we can get our hands on, hundreds. And we've got so many stories of people saying, hey, I've got a Nelly Gail, and I'm in Hawaii, or I'm in North Carolina. And so I'll jet out and go get it, or we'll have them come in. But anyway, so many fun stories there. But more so, she really believed in giving back and supporting and starting through vision different institutions. She was the head of the Laguna Beach Art Association. She was the president for a while, but when she was the head of the Permanent Collection Committee, so the Laguna Art Association was just basically a gallery. So painters would go there and sell their work. That was it. But they had a permanent collection that, because people had died and given paintings. And so it's from that permanent collection that the Laguna Art Museum was born, because now it wasn't paintings that were there to be sold. It was to be appreciated because of their quality and that sort of thing. So she was there for those very beginnings. And then also she helped start the Laguna College of Art and Design and also the Laguna Playhouse. And the current structure of the Playhouse, Nelly Gail helped build with architect William Pereira. He came back into the scene to help to build that for us. So, and then most of what is known as Nelly Gail Ranch, a big chunk of that was actually donated by Nelly Gail to Chapman College at the time. And then they held on to it for a while and then sold it and became Chapman University shortly thereafter. So she had a big heart, and she was very civic-minded and education-minded, and that's also part of our spirit as well. But
it's interesting because I have this vision of Dorothy in Kansas City marrying Lewis, which she was a lot younger, which I don't know how it was in those days. She was a ranch hand, an artist, like a Renaissance woman, but then she had this amazing vision, the civic side of her that and then I think you said in later years, as things were established, she would travel internationally for art. She
traveled the globe. She went around the globe at least twice. Yeah. And she put together a memoir of all of her flights. And it tells you a little bit about her humor. She counted being picked up by the tornado as her first flight. So, I mean, she had a spirit. And just reading, what she wrote, because she would kind of put together her opinions on what was happening in the day. Yeah. And whether it was women's right to vote or whether it was World War II or, whatever, we kind of know what she thought about all of that. And I think she had a pretty good handle on life and a pretty good long view.
Isn't this story just aching to be told?
I'd love to see it.
It's just aching to be told. One thing about, journaling is something that we've kind of forgotten about. Yeah. With the rich history and all the records you have of your family, is that something you're doing? Is that something you think about doing?
I have done it. Yeah. Not consistently enough. But I'm glad of the times that I did, because it was clear that there was something that wanted to get out. And I need to be more consistent about it. As you know, as a dad, those times just fly. Yeah. And to document that sort of thing, I see the value of it. Yeah. I mean, we're the beneficiary of it, and that we can share all these things that they saw and did. And so I should probably emulate it a little bit more. I'm going to try.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's almost like a lost art, but you start thinking about it, like the story that is such an amazing story, without her writings, without the records, right? It would just wouldn't be clear.
Right, and the color wouldn't be there, the context wouldn't be there. Many of the early communications were by telegram, which was the first Twitter. Yeah, I mean, you were limited in characters. You had to get it out. Yeah. There was nothing artful about it, but we have all these Western Union telegrams from one person to the next, a lot of them between the Orange County families, and then just for business and that sort of thing. And it was really abbreviated, communication. Yeah. But then the letters, the where they literally put a stamp on it, That's where all the color is. That's
Yeah.
where you learn. And it's funny, and I really believe this. I grew up in a small town, as I said. Our closest neighbor was a few miles away, small town, but we
Yeah.
knew everybody,
Yeah.
right? And that's the way it was here too. Like in terms of Orange County, all those Orange County families, they hung out, and
Yeah.
and even if they couldn't physically be together, they communicated and they learned about each other, and there was a dynamic and a caring, right? And they get together for brandings and things like that, or events, or they would throw parties for the fire department, because fire department was, it's always critical, but it was really critical
Yeah,
then.
here, for
One
sure.
spark and the whole ranch is gone. But now, like at least my experience is we have neighbors that are not 2 miles away, but 20 feet away,
That you don't
and we
know.
don't know them nearly as well. And so I don't know what that is, but it's certainly something that I think we could all do better at.
Is there any stories, I'm just thinking as we're talking, of some feuding between the families, like the Irvine family and the Moulton family or the other families? Is there history of any of that?
I don't know of any feud.
Yeah.
They all went to each other's weddings
Yeah.
and things like that. Were Nelly Gail and Ms. Irvine the best of friends? I don't think so.
Yeah.
But they worked together on some projects. Like
Yeah.
they brought the Festival of Opera. So
Yeah.
before Festival of Arts,
Yeah.
where they relive those pictures and
Yeah.
everything, they brought in Festival of Opera, and it was in Laguna for a number of years. It died out. They're actually bringing it back now.
Which would be
so
cool.
so they work together on different
Yeah.
things, and certainly there's a lot of inside stories from family,
Yeah.
that you hear across the dinner table, especially after a cocktail or two, that sort of thing. But nothing in the writings that we've seen.
Yeah.
There's no feuds of any sort.
Yeah.
Some of the most interesting stuff, though, is we just got 2 months ago from we found it in a horse tack room, a metal box, and it had a bunch of appraisal information. It was the first to earliest appraisal that we saw on the ranch, and it was going back and forth with the Gare family because they had a 1/3 interest in the company, but it wasn't defined by acreage.
Yeah.
So there's this ongoing debate between the family members and the attorneys about which land they thought of the 22,000 acres was more valuable than another. So how do they get a fair representation of their third interest?
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
And what was I can't imagine it was the coastal land.
No,
Back in the
fact,
time, that was probably the least valuable, right?
De Gares wanted the land that is basically Leisure World.
Yeah.
They wanted that because it was flat, it was rolling, it wasn't-
Central, yeah.
right. You could farm it, right?
Yeah.
Then the last thing that they wanted was Laguna Niguel, with all the ocean views, because it was rough. I mean,
Yeah.
you had to, and they actually ended up with they were kind of not happy, but they ended up with the Laguna Niguel piece.
Yeah.
But boy, I mean, now would you think differently? Of course you would.
It's amazing how history changed things.
Right,
Okay,
right,
so-
exactly. Because I mean, listen, we have appraisals that valued all that stuff, and
Yeah.
the beach property was worth less than the internal
Right.
Aliso Viejo area property. I mean, that was like $50 an acre, whereas the coastal stuff was less.
So people are going to have to come to the museum
Yeah.
to hear more of the story, or wait
Sure.
for it when we make it and it hits Netflix.
Yes,
right?
yes, that's
But
right.
let's go back. So Nelly Gail passes away in what year?
72.
72. And tell us a little bit about, let's go back to where we met and how that started in Monarch Bay.
Well, one of the things that she left behind were some real key decisions about property and that sort of thing. And one of those was that they wanted to keep the Monarch Bay piece, which, as you know, is 214 different lots. It was, the lease went into play in 1960. That's when Nelly Gail signed it.
And what
Yeah.
was the reason? So to give a lay of the land, so there's 214 homeowners in Monarch Bay, which is a gated community
Right.
on the ocean side of PCH, just south of Three Arch and just north of Ritz Cove or Monarch Cove,
Yeah,
right? And we have the Beach Club, which is owned by the 214 homeowners, which is leased out to the Monarch Bay Hotel.
That's right.
So they run it.
Yeah.
And so tremendous value there. What was the reasoning for her putting it on a lease?
It was very vogue at the time, to have a land lease, because you didn't want to sell the land because you knew it was going to be valuable, but you wanted to get cash flow off of it. It was their least favorite piece on the ranch.
Right.
Because cows and sand don't go together, or sheep or anything else.
Yeah.
It was also the place where they couldn't control the area because people come down there with tents or whatever.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of a pain.
Yeah.
But they held on to it because they had the vision to know that, pretty good piece of ground.
Which is crazy because now it's like a no-brainer. Do I take Nelly Gail? Do I take Aliso Viejo, or do I take Monarch Bay? I take Monarch Bay 100%. But back then, you couldn't work it. It was a different...
Yeah, it was a different thing because there wasn't the entitlement. And so the idea of a land lease is a wonderful generational play also in terms of preserving generational wealth, because it locked it away. Nelly Gail couldn't get to it. Parents couldn't get to it. Her kids, our parents, it put it in a time capsule essentially, and allowed for the valuation.
That's a
to
great.
continue.
It's like a time capsule. You're
right. I mean, that was it. And then there was Irvine Company had done the same thing.
Yeah.
And then they had a big brouhaha over the land lease expiring. So originally in 1960, it was a 30-year land lease with no option to purchase the dirt at all.
Right.
It was.
So you owned the home, you didn't own the dirt. There was no option.
You had to get out.
Yeah.
And Irvine Company went through that, trying to get people
Right.
out. It didn't work out so great. Theirs was structured a little differently, but essentially that led us to creating a buyout option. In 1988, there was a buyout option created so that the residents.
And who was that created by? That was you, the
yeah,
Moulton
it was
family.
before my time, but
it
yes.
was okay.
Yeah, primarily the trust and the land trust and the Monarch Bay Association or Monarch Bay Land Association was created to hold the option to buy, and so that gave everybody a bit of peace of mind. That was done in 1988, just 2 years before the land lease expires.
Yeah.
So, or it would have expired. So that is a pressure cooker.
And just to give some context, if you guys wouldn't have given the option, all of those people would have some major indigestion because at the end of they lose it.
Well, the only thing that they could do, according to the contract that was written at the time, was they could take their house with them. They could literally take their house with them and go. Obviously, that wasn't going to fly. That would just be nothing but a pain.
Lawsuits,
lawsuits on top of lawsuits. So then once the option was put in place, another 30-year lease was also put in place. So from 1990 to 2020, they had the ability to be there, continuing to pay a very reduced land lease rate with the option to buy at the end of 2020.
But then in 2013, when we met, this is when you guys started managing everything. And this is when you were talking about an early option to exercise before 2020.
Right.
In tranches, right?
Right, totally. So we knew we had to get up to speed. One thing about having sold off all the pieces of Moulton Ranch, and so my cousins lived on one ranch over there and another over there, and we were on ours. Our grandfather, who married Charlotte, was really the one in control of Monarch Bay, and it was around the time of the option to buy that he passed away, and so we had to get back to the table and not be separate from what was going on there. Because growing up, I didn't know about any of it. I mean, we were farm kids. We didn't have any idea about it, and I think to our benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
But we knew
you had no idea that all of this land was owned by the family.
None, zero.
But you came down here.
Right.
Yeah,
but that was after the fact. Yeah,
you knew there was rich history.
Yeah, but no, we're still learning more and more every day. But even, I went to Pomona College undergrad, which, is an hour away. But most of these cities were being born at the time. Many of them been incorporated in the early 90s.
Right.
And I had no idea.
Yeah.
And I think it was to our benefit. I give our parents credit for that.
Yeah.
Um,
So you guys get back to the table in 2013 or
yeah, because we knew we'd be lambs to slaughter if we didn't get our ducks in a row and truly know and understand the property. So that's when I left Washington, D.C. With a wife and 2 girls in tow and a third on the way, and we went after it.
Your own entrepreneurial story, packing up the car and ended up here.
Right. Yeah, kind of, and I knew that I'd always end up in development or real estate game based on what we had going on at some point. And so I went to work out of Pomona College. I went to work for the California Building Industry Association, working with folks like the Building Industry Association of Southern California, dealing with high production and also custom home builders, and being able to meet with their C-suite guys on a different level, because rather than going to work for them in the mailroom, because we were representing them in Sacramento and Washington, D.C., it gave me a different level of access. And so I was at the cocktail party rather than working the door, you know, and I got access
did you
to
know
really
when
amazing
you were
folks.
going through your history, did you know that you were building up all of these attributes that you would eventually need to do this? Was that part of the plan?
Slightly, yeah. I mean, I think so. I think I knew.
Yeah.
But it also was the right thing no matter what happened, right?
Yeah, for
There was
sure.
no guarantee that I was going to end up out here at all. What I do know, and I told my wife a lot, was when we were in Washington, D.C., it was great. Loved it. Wonderful place to be young and starting your career and all of that. But I didn't feel that anchor, the roots. And it didn't matter how long I stayed in Washington, D.C. There was nothing there that was going to give me an edge in a way that felt right.
Yeah.
And it certainly didn't feel like where I grew up in Maxwell, where you know everybody.
Right.
So I knew I wanted more of that than what I was. So I knew that there was going to be a transition. So doing all those things along the way, going to Georgetown for their real estate program and that sort of thing, those were good decisions no matter what. And it's just all worked out.
Yeah, that's awesome. So going back to Monarch Bay, let's talk a little bit about how special Monarch Bay is, because I want people to hear. You went through 3 different, there was a first option was 2012.
Yeah.
And then 2017, and then the lease ended in 2020. So now it's all fee simple. All 214 homeowners
all of it
have bought.
Yeah, they all came through. And every consultant that we brought through to meet with the family told us it was going to be a calamity. If we were going to be in court for 5, 10 years. It was going to cost us an arm, a leg, and another arm to even get through it. That everyone in the community was so well healed and connected that it was something that we were never going to be able to manage. And so that was the encouraging words that we had, that we paid for.
Yeah.
To come through. And we said, okay, all right, well, we're going to go, and we got offers to buy us out. Very discounted offers.
Yeah.
From people that you would know.
Yeah, for sure.
Or anybody in the country would know.
Yeah.
But we just said, no, we're going to stick it out. And it was the right thing to do. And one of the ways to mitigate risk at the end of 2020 was to allow for early sales.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there was a hammer in the contract that said it was an all or nothing deal.
Right.
Meaning, if you live there and you can buy your dirt, but the guy next to you can't, then nobody gets to buy their dirt.
Right.
Which I can't imagine a
Which
better
was
scenario.
scary, because at this time, I remember there was times we were going down there and trying to evaluate what's the difference between this lot and this lot and that lot. You guys were like taking on this. And I remember how scary the times were between 2013 and 20 with all of the potential exposure that you're talking about. But overall, everything just went very smoothly, right?
Yeah.
No litigation, no big issues. It's like, and it's one of the greatest, just to give a commercial for Monarch Bay, when you guys first came down here and we started looking at this and you were talking about selling the lots and then 10th and exchange, and then you ended up buying properties in Monarch Bay. I still remember, I was like, Jared, I want a place down there, because I started falling in love with it. Because if you look at our coast from like San Clemente to Huntington Harbor, there's no private beach club.
No.
And when I had 2 little kids, I loved to go to the beach, but going to the beach meant packing up the truck, finding a parking spot in Newport, taking them down there. Then they have to go to the bathroom, and then you can't. You have this amazing beach club. You go down with a great lawn, a bar, a restaurant. You have attendants putting up, umbrellas, chairs.
You never have to fight about a place to park.
Right.
You don't have to lug. The best part about going to the beach is not having to take anything with you. It's all there for you.
Yeah.
It's like when you go skiing. The worst part is carrying your skis around, and boots and all that
But
nonsense.
then it's just like you go down to the beach, you can go up and have a drink or have a hot dog and hang out. And then there's a community because the membership, so you to use the club, you either have to be a guest of the hotel.
Yep.
They sell memberships, yearly memberships, which I understand there's a 3-year waiting list.
At
or
least,
you're one of the 214 homeowners.
Right.
That is one of the owners. And so you have this amazing sense of community that until you go down there and start using it, you don't realize how amazing it really is.
And it's also pretty interesting too. So back in 1990 something, I got a hold of the lease.
Yeah.
And as I said, the family, when we left Orange County, it was for lifestyle. They're farmers, ranchers, still are. Okay. They didn't care about beach club or anything like that. Well, in the lease, it was written that we had memberships to the club.
Yeah. In the 90s.
But nobody had ever exercised the ability to do so.
Yeah.
But I got a hold of it. I was like, hey, by the way, do you guys know that we're members to this club? We couldn't even get in the gate. We own the property. We couldn't get in the gate. And I tried.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
You couldn't get
but
in the
nobody
gate.
in the family had known that we could actually go to this club. And nobody at the gate knew to let us in. We weren't members, even though it was ours. Yeah. And even though we were. So
you were members to a club that you owned, but nobody knew you remembered. That's
right,
funny,
exactly.
Right?
But the club is truly unique, and the remodel they did there was great. The management by the Waldorf Astoria and Monarch Beach Resort in St. Regis.
And now the Ohana Group owns it, which is an unbelievable group. They own the.
We're very fortunate that it's operated and maintained in a professional way and not by the residents ourselves, because we'd screw it up.
For
right?
sure.
And the wide streets and the community and the people that are there, just in general, it's a really unique place. And we got through all of that pretty much unscathed. The Monarch Bay Land Association, the Monarch Bay Association, we worked pretty well together. We had our moments, right? And most of the folks down there are great. Some aren't, but that's okay. That's a community, right?
Right. Yeah.
But all in all, we're very happy with the way things came out, and only one person didn't come through and buy their dirt, and that's really a testament to the process, the communication. Getting 214 homeowners, but it doesn't sound like a lot.
Oh, man.
But to get everybody on the same page to do all those things and to execute, it took a big effort and on the part of a lot of people, and we're grateful that it did.
And for all those listening, this is a part of a bigger renaissance. The Monarch Bay Club becoming, or the Monarch Bay community becoming fee simple. When you go in there, everybody's building now because they feel confident they own the land. But then you go to the Strand, which is at the other side of the beach, right in front of the headlands, a new community of 131 homes. They're about to undergo the Dana Point Harbor remodel, which has always kept, I would say, kind of kept Dana Point down a little bit because the big boats would go from Mexico or San Diego to Newport.
Right.
So this 10-year remodel that Joe Ubroth and Bob Olson are doing is making Dana Point great. So I just want to finish with a couple of questions about you. What's the next 10 years look like for you? And what are you super focused on? What do you choose to prioritize your time now with what you're doing?
Right. Well, with the age of my daughters, number one on the list is being present, right? They need their dad around.
Which is difficult.
And present. I get pulled in a lot of different directions. Moulton Museum is certainly a priority to get it off the ground and to make it sustainable. The business part of it is always there, and the exciting part about that is that we're coming out of the ground with some development outside of California. And when I started in 2013, all we had was property in California, and now we're in 12 different states. doing some pretty fun projects, a lot of industrial, some commercial retail, and a little bit of residential here and there. So we've diversified the income stream. We've diversified our product line. We've gone into business with some just amazing people in terms of the tenants that are paying us rent every month. And so diversity within even the same product line through the types of tenants that we have. So it's really provided just a secure base for the family office, which to me is job number one. All the rest comes along. But
so you guys gave me a gift as being a part of your move down here and helping with the real estate, which I still is my favorite gift, and it's the picture of, it's a coral tree, right?
Yeah.
So there's a coral tree that sits on Crown Valley and PCH, and during the holidays it's lit up. It's become like the cornerstone of the community, and you made this amazing frame. So I thank you for that. And then a shotgun. But
yeah,
when I was trying to get you a gift, I still remember going through, what do I get this guy? And then you talked about being a Rams fan. And so we went and played golf with Eric Dickerson.
One of the
How good was that?
Oh, yeah, it was pretty solid. That I will never forget. And my memory is not great, but just the conversations I had with who was a childhood hero of mine. I mean, the goggles and and number 29 for the Rams. I mean, I wore 29 in high school just because of him. So to be able to be in a golf cart with him, it was unbelievable.
I still remember when you met him, you were a little speechless, and then 18 holes in, you guys were like the best of friends.
And then as it turned out, both of us were going to Hawaii 2 days later, and we ran into each other at luggage. It was just pretty cool.
Yeah.
Amazing stuff.
Well, thanks for joining us. Look out for, I think it's just going to be called Moulton Ranch, being released sometime late 2025.
Right.
Because I think the seeds of everything are born. But we appreciate you being here. You've been a great friend. And I just think it's such a rich history that you could share with us today.
Thank you. My pleasure. And everybody's welcome to come to Moulton Museum and check it out. And by the way, you speak about Moulton Ranch. There's a new show coming in to our art gallery right next to the museum called Back to the Ranch. Jeff Sewell is the artist. He's a living master. Come check out some great art.
And when does that open?
That's going to open in March.
March. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to seeing you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Room, presented by the Smith Group. This episode was hosted by Tim Smith and produced by Michelle Akers. Chris Stacy is our studio director. Editing by Jake Austin. Special thanks to Pacific Staging and Cindy Newport.